Hello again. This is another entry, obviously. I have another 7 questions which my friends encouraged me to ask. I just wanted to let you know that these are good questions to ask. So the first question is, what is COVID-19 exactly? And according to my best evaluation or investigation, research, whatever you want to call it, it's nothing in particular other than a particular sequence occurring within a strand of RNA material that they have gathered through testing, and the origin of that particular segment of RNA itself is not known. That is, they can't determine, they have not the ability to determine whether that sequence of RNA, that particular RNA, is a result of the natural processes of the cell generating that RNA, or whether it indeed is some sort of interference from some extracellular stimulus, which they think is injecting. In this case, they believe it's the coronavirus. They believe there's some sort of injection having taken place, is what they call it, where this thing's hijacked the machinery of the cell and is causing it to manufacture a particular set of proteins, and these proteins are causative of the illness which we have. Anyway, I'm not a scientist, I'm just doing my best. But what I am very convinced of is that they have no conclusive evidence to attribute causation of illness to this particular, I guess you might call it a phenomenon, or the existence of these sequences of RNA. So that's my first point. You should find out what exactly is COVID-19, but dig deep, ask them, how do they know that? If you research to any degree, you'll see that the whole theory of whether viruses exist, the different hypotheses of how they've come into being, all these things, they're very non-conclusive, and they're at best a theory which is trying to ideally it's trying to explain, give answers to questions and concerns that people should have, but at the same time they seem to have gone down a wrong path, as best I can understand it. I'm not a researcher. I'm doing my best. I don't want to underestimate the ability of people to find things out using all the different technologies they have. But what I would say is that the technology is very much the problem in these cases, in particular in this case, because the technology is not suited to the task that it's being applied. So, I stick to my guidelines, sorry. Number 2, what is causation, correlation, and incubation? Well, when we look at what these terms mean, it simply means what causes an effect is the causative is causation. So if this particular protein or this particular RNA sequence, this particular molecule is causative of illness is unknown. It correlates with the presence of illness is known. So they can say, well, when these people come in, and it seems that the vast majority of people who do test are either, what I've heard is what they call asymptomatic or very mildly ill. These people don't go on to develop any really dangerous or serious type of illness from the presence of this particular molecule. So, and the question is still out there: is the molecule being produced in response to some other extracellular, or like this? If the body's responding to immune response is to produce this particular molecule, this RNA, to build these proteins, and it's responding to something that's distressing your body, that could be very much be the case. So some people will produce it in response to a particular type of pathogen or, toxin or, stimulus of their body, which is, the body's responding to. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get sick and have pneumonia, or they're going to have symptoms. And if they do have pneumonia and symptoms, the presence of this particular molecule within their system, they can't even ascertain, as best I can tell, whether it's a positive influence in the body's, like defense against that pathogen or that toxin, that stimulus, or whether it's actually, causative of the illness and, making things worse. So that's a big question to get answered properly, not speculatively, and not, saying that theory says this and then all the anomalies, all the things that don't accord with the theory are overlooked or pushed aside, or, basically disappeared from, from the researchers' consideration. That's not science. That's confirmation. It's not merely confirmation bias. It's corruption of knowledge, and this is what I'm concerned about. And I don't mean to point the finger or blame anyone in particular. I think it's a lack of due attention all of us have some small degree of responsibility for, because we've become so excited about, impressed by our own ability to produce technologies that we rely upon, and then even develop technologies upon those technologies, that we've become so abstracted and so, like hyper focused on our own interpretation of reality, that we're a million miles away from. That's what I'm saying. It's like people are not sick, and people need not be sick, and people need not be so horribly affected by all this stuff if they can just understand that there's a set of questions that we all should be asking ourselves, each other, and most particularly the people who are doing their best to care for us, whether it's the people in the medical on the medical side of things, or whether it's people on the political side of things. We need to ask these things, because these people have taken seriously and do their best to exercise due care and take responsibility for making the right decisions and helping us to stay healthy. But if the information they get in the first instance has become not necessarily, well, it is, unfortunately, the only way you can describe it is corrupted. So I'm very concerned.
Repeat again.
Yeah. So I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned because when you look at what is incubation, for example, everyone knows they keep going, well, 27 days. It could be 14 days. It's because if you look at what incubation is and the way that they predict it, or the way they decide what the incubation period is, that's as vague and as unreliable as the viral theory, as the theory which is actually, incidentally, I'm about to read a paper that was produced in 1937, where a prominent virologist actually described their inability to satisfy, I might be jumping a bit ahead, I'll just stick to my point. So what is the test for COVID-19 is point number 3. Incubation, you need to look that up. It's not reliable. It's not helpful. It's very unhelpful. Number 3, what is the test for COVID-19? Well, the test for COVID-19 is they use what they call reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reactor. It's a little machine that heats and cools genetic material in a way that the DNA within that material actually, because of the effect of the heat, the two strands of the DNA separate, and then when they separate, when they don't rejoin again when they're cooled, they generate a corresponding sequence which effectively duplicates them. So then they repeat this cycle, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, as many times as they can, as fast as they can. And then after they've done that, like how many cycles, I think in this case, the ones that I've been reading are between 37 and 40 something cycles, that generates, because it's like 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, it's 2 to the power of 37. That's like billion. or we know more. I'm not a mathematician either, but it's a lot of bits and pieces, and then they have sufficient volume, sufficient material to actually identify, like some sort of, like I suppose the existence of these molecules under an electron microscope, but that in itself is not it's not necessarily helpful, and in fact, I believe it is the primary offending, factor. I believe it's the cause of COVID-19. It's not the solution. It's not, we're not finding something that hasn't been there or that shouldn't be there. We're finding something that we're going looking for and making and attributing illness to it. And worse still, we're determined to attribute illness to it, even though it's present where people aren't ill, even though it's present where people have never had the opportunity to be infected with this virus, even though it's it's some people test positive and test negative and test positive and test negative day after day. They're flip-flopping backwards and forwards. There are so many inconsistencies. So anyway, that's the test. I think people need to really dig in hard on that, man, because it's not reliable, and you shouldn't let these silly little bloody machines that are just so simple and not designed actually for this. I'll get on with that. So number 4, I've got to get through this quickly. What is reverse transcriptase PCR designed to do? Well, it's designed to basically, it's designed to. It was the fellow Dr. Mullis, whatever his name was, he died last year, I think. He developed it. He won a Nobel Prize for his contribution to the genome project back in his time. Mapping the human genome, because this machine enabled them to generate quantities of DNA, of genetic material that they needed to conduct all of these inquiries, investigations, do the science on. So it's a great machine, but it's not designed to do this. And the testing protocols are making it do something it's never designed to do. And they're speculating to the degree they should never be speculating. And this is the result, is this is finally come back and has gotten so out of control when it's been compounded by information technology, hyperconnectivity, and hyper awareness of liability, blah, blah, blah. Everybody wants to, stay safe and keep everyone else safe, and takes very carefully, they pay careful attention to their responsibility, but they don't necessarily pay very much attention to reality. That's, again, I'm having a rant to some degree. I find this very difficult to do. So, they're good questions to ask. Number 5, what is a scientific theory? Well, a scientific theory is just that. It's a theory. It's like they're putting forward an idea, a hypothesis, or a set of hypotheses that they think could explain a phenomenon, something that's that they're observing. The problem is, in this case in particular, they're so bloody focused on the theory they've got that they're excluding any other possibility. And that's the next thing. So, for example, there's a guy called Robert Koch, or Robert Koch, Koch, and he made this. He expressed these postulates, or had these postulates attributed to his name that they use in biological science and in science in general, particularly biological science, to say, okay, well, these postulates need to be satisfied to make any investigation of biological material reliable. It's something that we can rely on as being consistently consistent with reality. So I'm not going to read through those. Look up those Koch's, or Kochs, Koch's postulates. Okay. What happened in 1937, this paper that I'm about to read, the virologists came out and said, listen, we can't satisfy those postulates. It's impossible for us to do that. There's no way we can isolate this particular molecule in a way that we can say it's absolutely either exists of its own, of its own self, or whether, it's, I'm not describing it well, but it's not, it's actually, so what they did was, for virology to survive as a science, they dismissed the Koch's postulates, and they made their own 2 postulates instead, which are just, that basically says anything goes, it's okay, whatever supports our theory is viable, that's what we would like to operate with. The problem is gross inconsistency in terms of the variables that they can't control. There's no way of using a control mechanism within these experiments. That's the problem. So anyway, that's and then I've got Occam's razor. So Occam's razor in this case, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty simple. You just say, okay, well, how do you explain all the anomalies? How do you explain people, flip-flopping backwards and forwards, positive, negative? How do you explain people not getting the disease or this virus, from this sickness, or not having a sickness at all, as the case may be, because they're, geographically remote? How do you understand, the fact that within a family, people can be symptomatic, asymptomatic, test negative, positive, despite they're living in the same place, for God's sake? All this stuff is dismissed out of hand by the current theory, when they should be saying, well, what's a better way? Oh, actually, maybe our theory's wrong. Maybe what's actually happening is we're finding this COVID-19 molecule, which they're describing as a virus, and that in and of itself is not problematic to a person's body. It may not be. It may be, like I said, a part of the defense against, threat to the person's body. They don't know that. It's, look, I'm going out on a limb here, but I'm telling you, it's very much, the case that people don't think these things through, and we need to start thinking. So that needs to be applied to the facts and theory. Number 6, I'm nearly there. Sorry for banging on. Why are we so terribly vulnerable to the current crisis? Well, ask that question. Why are we? Well, what I'm saying is, I believe it's because of our dependence on technology, and instead of actually using our eyes, and more importantly, using our intuition as well, and saying, what is going on around me realistically, we're so focused on technology, and information technology in particular, to provide us with our information, that we cannot get real. And even to the point where we say, it is real, man. People are suffering, people have got no income, people are really dreadfully, horrifically impacted by this current crisis, not because of any illness, but because of a speculation, which is completely understandable but not acceptable, that we behave in this way in relationship to one another. I'm going out all the time. I'm not spending my time sitting in front of a computer screen all day. I'm out and about, man. I'm bumping into people I've always been bumping into, and I'm watching their lives just smashed. I want this to change. So the last point is, I'm about to wind up. So, why is it? Because we need to think for ourselves. Number 7, how can we rescue ourselves and our children from the real and present danger that this current crisis is threatening against us? Well, there is real consequences. If we let it keep going this way, the same errors of science, because that's what they are. It's not science at all. It's a disgrace. It's not science. It's a disgrace, and everybody's buying it as science, literally buying it, and they will be buying it, and they'll be suffering for it, because this science, in inverted commas, or complete aberration of science, is actually going to cause big fallout. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not into conspiracy and blaming and stuff, but I'm saying, if we don't pay attention and take care of ourselves in terms of switching our brains on and saying, look, because you don't need all these vaccines. It's proven the medications are potentially fatal. They're at least far more toxic than the illness itself in most cases, if not all cases. Our body behaves in a way that is it's profound, and it's brilliant, it's wonderful. You just need to look after it properly. So, we need to look after our children. We don't want the world to be, some sort of, post-Orwellian, I don't know. I'm not into all this stuff, but I'm just saying, I hear all these terms and people talk about conspiracies and stuff. I don't care about that. I care about people just paying attention so that we don't have poor governments imposing vaccines and everyone believing that, having, the administration of these, that they are deliberately, they're deliberately poisoning us, essentially. They're introducing these viruses or whatever. What I'm saying is, let's just get real about this and, try and help each other and help the government and help the medical people, help everyone. Just get out of the hole. It's a massive hole we've dug ourselves. Let's get out of it.